Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Job. I'm a reporter here at Access Premium, and today I have with me Brad Feldman. He's the New England Revolution's sports reporter and sports anchor. Please welcome Brad Feldman.
Good to be with you, Brandon. Thanks.
So, Brad, before we get into anything, please talk about how you got into the soccer realm and like how you started playing soccer growing up.
So I think I was quite fortunate growing up in the Boston area in the 70s and 80s, insofar as I was exposed to the sport of soccer as being one of the major sports, the combination of the various first, second, and third generation immigrant populations, the international input in terms of media. We were able to see soccer made in Germany, the English First Division. World Cup games were shown on closed circuit even before they were widely available over commercial TV. And the schools I went to, both in Baltimore, when I lived there for a couple of years as a young kid, and the Boston area, all had soccer. I lived in a town, Belmont, that had a strong Bays youth soccer program. And even before then, my first sports team that I was ever on was a U8 team called the Ruxton Wizards. We didn't lose a game. We didn't play very good soccer, but it was one of those things when the plane flew by, 10 kids on the other team would be staring at the plane. We were smart enough to keep playing, and that was our edge. But I also got to be the ball boy for the University of Baltimore national Division II NCAA national championship team in 1975. And it was a big deal. And one of the things about Baltimore is a little bit like, Fall River, New Bedford, St. Louis, Chicago, Milwaukee, the cities around the U.S. where soccer was considered a major sport. And so people would come out, and there was, Led Zeppelin and Casey and the Sunshine Band and the Isley Brothers blaring over loudspeakers, and everybody come out, and the soccer games were a thing. They were a party, and it was a cool thing to be a soccer player. And, a lot of the Italian and Irish kids considered soccer one of the major sports, along with baseball. Oh, down there, it's lacrosse, football, baseball, basketball, and soccer. And that was, again, like Milwaukee, St. Louis are good analogs for Baltimore. So that made me think that soccer was cool. And I remember the players waiting for the films to come in, the 16 millimeter films from the World Cup. Johan Cruyff was the guy that they're all talking about, even though they lost in the final to West Germany. It was a big deal to see that first goal where Holland had like 16 touches in the build up to scoring the first goal. And I remember Johan Cruyff's name was in my ear even before Pele. And then when Pele came to the U.S., my grandfather made sure that my brother and I got to see him in person, even before it became like a really big thing when they were at Giants Stadium, when they were at Randall's Island and Yankee Stadium. The first couple of years that Pele was with the Cosmos, my grandfather made sure we got to those games. And so I think it made a big impression. Now, I'm not going to go on too long about my playing career. Like a lot of American kids, I kind of fell off the log at 15. I got enough basic skills, that I can complete a side foot pass over 12, 15 yards with the right weight and pace.
Okay.
And I've
Had
never
some
been
skill growing up.
Well, no. Well, how's this? I've never been a great dribbler, but what happened was I came back, and when I started commentating on the games years later, I realized I needed to play to get a feel for the game. And so I got into the Over the Hill League, and I played in a lot of the indoor and futsal leagues. And, to be frank, people think I'd with my size, I'd be like a big, center back or a striker. In 11v11 game where there are good players, it was only at the very tail end of my adult playing career, which is over now, that I started being a guy that you get the ball to and not cough it up, in the middle of the field. So I was more like an outside midfielder or even like a right back, and not
Would
a
you say
great
you
one.
had a lot of speed? Did you have a lot of speed too?
But that faded, right? Like I had a lot of speed when I was younger. I was a pretty good
Okay.
athlete when I was younger, but everybody gets older with you. But there are always a couple of guys who stay in great shape who keep their wheels fast enough, but like more quick than fast at this point. Anyway, that was mitigated when we played 6v6 without boards. I really liked that on the turf, with smaller goals. I ran a lot of those teams, and also the couple of years I played futsal, I briefly imported the Munich brand from Catalunya, from Barcelona, with one of the former Revs players. And so that gave me the impetus to get into futsal. And that, when the ball doesn't pop on you on your first touch, all of a sudden I'm a much better looking player. And then I became a center forward. I could use my big frame to hold guys off first touch was clean. I could turn and face, toe poke it in, all that stuff. I was grooving on the futsal. And
Exactly.
yeah, so, but I don't want to represent myself as anything other than a recreational player who's a pretty good athlete, but loved the game. And what I would say is that, I think that playing, gave me a feel for it, because the way I got into it was back in 1998 when I took my first sportscasting job outside of Dallas, but way outside of Dallas, a good hour, 15 minutes north of Dallas. My wife and I didn't know many people. We didn't know anybody down there. And so some mutual friends hooked us up with some people about our age who they said, oh, you guys will have a lot in common. Turned out one of them played for the Dallas Burn, now FC Dallas. And he's still like a great friend. And without him, I wouldn't have got into soccer commentating. But what happened was we had busy schedules. So finally he said, hey, the World Cup's on. I've been watching every game. Come meet us at this Irish bar in North Dallas, and we'll watch the Holland Brazil game. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, bet. Go watch Holland Brazil with a bunch of pro players. That sounds cool. So I went, and it was just one of these things. Right now, I'm old enough to be the player's father, right? But back then, I was, these were like cool guys. They had a lot in common, and it was just one of those days where it was an epic, memorable game, and a great atmosphere at the bar. And we just fell in. We still have like running jokes from that day. And a lot of these guys went on to be team captains or team presidents. Some of them are still in the game, some of them aren't, but they really made my wife and me feel welcome. But in the course of that, getting to know them and watching games with them, they're like, you have a feel for it. And that was the thing, is that, whether I'm a great reader of tactics and so forth is open to debate. But what I am pretty good at is anticipating what's going to happen next. I read the moment,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
pretty well. And I think that came from watching it from the time I was 7 years old, playing it from
Mm-hmm.
the time I was 7 years old, knowing what's possible, knowing what guys are going to try. And so, even if manager makes a shift and, does an inverted right back, or, goes from, a 3-4-3 to 3-5-2, and I don't notice right away because I'm ball watching, I'm a play-by-play guy. I think that your initial question is a good one, because the fact that I grew up with the sport, not as a great player, but somebody who was like a passionate fan and watched the game, played the game. I went to a high school where the teams were going to like the knapsack tournament, and I jump on the
Mm-hmm.
bus as an eighth grader and go and like run the lines and be there, because I loved the vibes, I love the feel, I love the
Yes.
sort
Having
of
that passion for the sport, just loving the
yeah, like
sport.
nothing's better. Like I'm a big basketball guy too, and slam dunk's a
Same
great
here.
moment. A three,
Same here.
yeah, but a goal in soccer is the biggest event in sport. It's just the best thing. And so, I think that passion is what drove me towards it. And then, the game was really good to me when I was getting my career going. A lot of like opportunities I never thought I'd have opened up. Some of it's luck, some of it's timing. And I think a lot of it was just like people could feel that I cared so much about it that I was going to put in the work.
So you already talk about like how we were going through all sorts of obstacles with the soccer, whether it was playing for high school, college, but was your family as well? Because it kind of sounds like it, as you've been talking about. Was your family as well also like a very soccer driven? No,
No,
they weren't.
no, no. My
Really?
my grandfather was, because he was from Brooklyn, New York, and there was a lot of the really great semi-pro teams like Fall River, New Bedford, Providence,
Mm-hmm.
in like the 20s and 30s. So he saw a lot of it, but I think his feeling was that he wanted us to see those Cosmos games, even though we lived in Boston, and I went to the T-Men games as a result of him taking me to Cosmos. And again, I didn't realize until I got to be like 11 or 12 years old that it wasn't really a major sport yet in the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. because I
Yeah.
was so places like even though the crowds weren't huge for the T-Men, it was a big deal when like my team or my summer camp would like pile onto the bus and go down to Foxborough, or the season that they were because the pro teams sort of pivoted back and forth between Nickerson Field BU and the old Schaefer Stadium, Foxborough Stadium. Um, it was on financially thin ice, the league at that
So
point.
maybe not big for
It
like the
wasn't my
community,
family.
but
It wasn't
big.
but they exposed me to it and they encouraged
Yeah.
it.
Okay, so maybe, yeah, like you said, maybe not big for the family, or like obviously like at the time like MLS wasn't as big or anything like that.
It
But
wasn't.
just for
It
you in
didn't
itself,
exist. It didn't
yeah.
exist. We're
But just
talking
for you
about
in itself,
we're talking
like
about
playing it.
15, 20 years before MLS.
Oh yeah, yeah. But just
I'm old.
like you
I'm
said, for
old.
you,
I'm old, man. Like I'm telling you.
just for you playing the sport is what I'm saying. Like you had that passion for it and you loved it, even though
Yeah.
it was still not introduced yet, like you said, MLS, and obviously your family not really playing
Right.
the sport or
Right.
anything like that.
Well, I also think it was helpful to go to schools where it was, considered like a real sport. And, they did send kids to college soccer. And, I'm still in touch with my coach, George Seeley, who really, helped. And when I dropped out, he really didn't want me to stop. He came and tried to recruit me back. He's like, nobody loves it more than you. But I was like, listen, I've gone from being like the attacking midfielder to the center back to the right back. I can feel where the next move, and that's to the bench. He's like, no, no, man. He's like, but even if you just play 10 minutes at the end, like your passion will contribute. I was just so into hoops and other sports that like I wasn't putting in the reps anymore. I had a very steep trajectory when I was young. So maybe a functionally okay, okay player, but like kids for whom playing the sport was their number one thing, even back then, you could see the separation. The kids who were playing all summer and all spring, and I was doing
Okay.
other things like basketball. So, yeah.
Okay. Now, as you start to get into the broadcasting, you already talked about, okay, physically wasn't the best soccer wise, but you had that intellectual side for the game and you knew certain tactics and everything like that.
Yeah,
Do you feel
no,
like that was easy to kind of like now start to get into the commenting of the games? Because it's one
yeah,
thing to play it, but it's another thing to comment for the viewers that are watching.
yeah, no. Like, just want to say, physically, I could always run and jump. For me, it was the touch on the ball and the confidence. Being able to sort of pick up your head and take the space and combine with people short, the small touch. We didn't play a lot of small sided stuff. All the things that kids take for granted now. I just it was a much more sort of old school environment. But yeah, like I was saying earlier, I think that being able to read the game in real time helps with the commentary because you never want to guess, but you do want mentally to be like a tempo ahead so that you have, if you can, a range of options. So you never call the goal before it goes in, but when you recognize that that expected goals are going up in real time when a guy gets into a certain spot, if you got you know you know numbers advantage or a good angle, then you can get out in front of it, and then you learn by doing to not um, again guess. What you learn to do is sort of say the shot and he hits the back of the net or just over the bar, and when
That the
the way
anticipation.
right, and the way I really learned to do it, and again I'm not 100%, I'm just telling you what the goal is, and the way you know the people I talk to who I look at and say are the best in the business. JP Della Camera was the one who, the back of a paper napkin gave me sort of a coach up on how to do games off the monitor. Before, a lot of people I knew were doing that, but I got the opportunity to call a lot of games, now 20 years ago at ESPN International, mainly the Italian and Scottish leagues, but also Champions League, World Cup qualifiers, stuff like that, Spanish league. And doing it off the monitor back then when you didn't have HD, when you didn't have as much information on the
Different
internet,
ball game.
it
Different
was a
ball
lot
game.
harder. So
Yep.
the first thing he said to me is never guess. You say the shot, and then you get the cutaway. Del Piero just over the bar, right? But if it's just a little tiny blip on the screen, you got an old SD picture, and you're not sure, and everybody's wearing striped shirts, and those numbers blend in, and they 90% of them have the same haircut, right? So you gotta make sure you get the right guy. And if you still don't know, if they don't go to the close up or the cutaway, or the hero shot, you just say a good chance for Juventus, goal kick for Inter, and Juventus will drop off, and whatever. You just keep going, and the person watching at home or the person in the bar, they're probably not going to write in and say, "Hey, you didn't say that was Del Piero made that shot." You learn to play the percentages, and I think that this having a feel for the game, to your question, is it's just an advantage. Now, can you gain it over time? Yes, you can. Like there are people who are really good sports producers and announcers who weren't soccer people growing up, who learn um, who learn very quickly and very well. But I also had producers who were like could see every pitch in a Red Sox game. You know how they tell you whether it's a slider or a curve or
Yep.
split finger fastball or whatever. They could read that off the pitcher's hand. on television, but they could not keep it in their mind that you're not offside on a throw-in because they didn't grow up with it, you know?
Exactly.
So, you
Exactly.
know, it's like, so that's the thing. So I do think it was an advantage. It's not the only advantage. There are, you know, my producer with the Revolution, Jim Dodonna, he used to insist on doing like a goalkeeper split screen, like hockey, and putting up their records. I was like, Jim, I love that in hockey, but it's not something that's done here. Now he's the lead producer for Apple TV, and he knows he went from being a producer to being a director. Actually, he's, I think, the best in American soccer TV. I think he really
Hmm.
is. But he evolved over time because he had done all these hockey broadcasts
Yes.
for Nesson and down, the Islanders and stuff like that. But over time, he realized there's a culture and sort of expectations around football that made it different. And I used to, when I ran the broadcasts, do a yearly seminar just for the people working on the Revolution broadcast. And what I would do is I'd put together a bunch of clips from, not surprisingly, Holland, Argentina, places where it's not the English Premier League or the Champions League, where they have so much money and they have so many resources. It'd be unfair to tell my guys, I want you to do it like a Champions League game.
Exactly. Because you
They have
don't have
they have
resources like them.
22 cameras and two
Yes.
trucks and super slow-mo and all these things. I was
Yeah.
like, watch a mid-table game in Argentina or Holland. They do it a little differently, but everybody in that truck grew up playing soccer. And the conventions that they observe are basically agreed upon: how to cover an offside, how to cover a second yellow card. When you go, when they're past, if 3 men at the back, it goes from like the right side center back to the center back, then you push in and you show the elegant, Nesta or somebody, moving it quickly, and like they're just like little things that people who know the sport, they may not even know why it feels right to them. When people say, oh, well, MLS telecasts don't feel authentic, that's not universally true. We have really, really good people doing them.
You
But
and Charlie Davies, by the way.
no,
You
but
and
I
Charlie
mean
Davies.
behind the scenes, making the pictures and the graphics. We're way, way better in this country than we used to be. And I don't
Mm.
like it when people sort of diss them, but I do sometimes watch some of the telecasts from other parts of the country where I know they don't have as savvy a crew and as savvy a producer director combination and technical director. People, when those people have a feel for the sport, I think it's actually even more important than the people talking, because
Yes.
it's like those pictures scratch an itch. It's like sometimes there are things that you can see at home or on your device watching the stream or the telecast that make it an enhanced experience over being at the game. So things like offside, right? And
Hmm.
like one of the things that people always talk about is like, why would you show the stoppage time board if there's an attack on, right? All you need to do on a telecast, it put +4, right?
Yeah.
Or even do a drop down, say added time 4 minutes. But for some reason, some people insist on doing a cutaway to the guy at the digital board as somebody's moving into the penalty area on the attack. Why would you ever do that? It's an American thing. Oh, that looks cool. Like if it's out of bounds, fine.
Yes.
If there's nothing, if it's in the midfield, yeah, you can go quickly to the board. But let the announcer say it, put a little graphic up, and then stay with the ball. Keep the live ball in play on camera. That's the ethos. And so that's what we're evolving to. And I think, a long-winded answer, but what I will say is this. I think because we have conventions in other sports, and so many of our sports are much more stop-start, it's very hard for people who didn't grow up with it or haven't spent 30 years immersed in it to adapt. I love basketball, but there's no equivalent of free throws in soccer. Closest thing might be a corner kick, but you got to learn early. If a team's up 1-0 and it's late in the game, they're going to take a long time to take that corner kick. You can jam in a replay or two. But if
Hmm.
if they're down by a goal, they're going to be sprinting over the corner. You don't have time to show that close chance in all likelihood, because they're going to get that corner in quick. And people, like, there's some guys it takes them 5 years to figure that out. I'm
I know.
like, they're like, how do you know? I'm like, look at the scoreboard, dude. Like, think about if you were out there, you'd be rushing. You don't have to
Exactly.
be, but like it, because like it's, there's no timeouts and things like that. It's just hard for some people, not all people, to get their heads around. And the main thing, and is like, that's why I say, like, you don't have to like sit in a bar and watch Champions League all day. I'm like, go to your local college game and like pretend you have season tickets. Like, go to every home game you have time to go to. Go to a practice. All of a sudden, you start to pick up the lingo and the tempo and what people are trying to do, what the sort of conventions of the sport are. And I think that, that's the way you can, if you didn't do what I did, play youth soccer and go to, watch European games on closed circuit TV when you were little, you can, it's a lot easier than learning to dribble in traffic when you're older.
Exactly. But a two-part question for you, because I know obviously we're short for time, but I want to ask you two things. So one, do you think it was best for MLS to start streaming all their games on Apple? Because that's one. 'Cause I know now you and Charlie do stuff from on radio. And
Right.
also for the future now, because I know you see just literally just yesterday when the agreements of the Everett Stadium for the New England Revolution, do you feel like it's good for the New England Revolution to move to Boston or to stay in Foxborough?
So those are both pretty loaded questions, because, right, I think that they're, especially the first one, mix of opinions. What I'll say is, right, it definitely changed my world moving from being, not just on TV, but in charge of the TV production to now just being sort of nominally in charge of the radio. Where, if you didn't know, like, you can still hear Charlie and me on Apple TV on home games. You can go to the home radio option, pivot to that. It's like doing SAP. And we get pretty good uptake on that from the Revs fans. It's one of the things that's really gratifying for Charlie and me is that, when the Athletic did a poll, like, Reds fans were tied for first, and it was all the OGs. It was all the old teams like LA, DC, who had been around for a long time, where the
The
team
day
like to be.
ones. Yep.
Well, they're no, and the ones, the old ones too, like Columbus,
Yeah.
where they like stick with their local announcers because a lot of them been there for coming up on 3 decades or more. So, uh, but taking that out of the equation, it's been good and bad for me. Like, I wasn't crushed that I didn't end up doing the TV. That's a younger man's game in a lot of ways. And I feel really proud that, like, a lot of the crews that I used to help put together and hire and the crewer that, like it's like a Revolution home broadcast when it's coming from Gillette Stadium in terms of the personnel in the truck and working the cameras and so forth. But globally, I think it's a mixed bag. I think, the Messi thing, it's been a great thing for
Yes.
MLS and Apple, and the numbers for that,
100%.
are
100%.
better, and I guess I just wonder, you saw they shortened the agreement um, to 2029. And I don't know what that means. Is it going to, sort of redound back to us to do the production in partnership with a regional sports network or Boston station like we did for 27 years before that. We'll never know. I do think that in terms of getting like highlights on the local news and so forth, it is a bit invisible. I know people my age and older have really, people your age, are very facile and comfortable with the digital streaming devices and so forth.
Oh yeah,
But I
obviously for
get
us
that
it's easy.
my dad and my high school coach and people like that, they struggle with the tech. I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. But I guess what I'd say is, like, I love the streaming picture. I like some of the shoulder programming. I think the game presentation is pretty good, and it is one-stop shopping. Next year, they're going to get rid of the sort of the if you have Apple TV, you get the games. There's not an extra, MLS, season pass package on top of that you have to pay for. So I think that will get more eyeballs on the games.
Okay.
So I guess I would just say, like a lot of things, like most things in life, like there are some pros and there's some cons. I prefer to emphasize the pros, but I do know it's harder for some people to find than it was 3 years ago when we were on TV 38, WBZ, NBC Sports, or whoever the partner was. And the second part is, listen, the only thing that I see being bad about the Revs getting a stadium in Everett is I feel badly for the people in Southeast Mass, in the Foxborough area, you know,
Yes.
Northern Rhode Island people, loyal fans and season members who've been going for a long time. It's gonna be harder for them to get to the games. But
Especially to bring it to the city too. Like it's more Red Sox, Bruins, like
but I'm gonna flip that. Like, it's a no-brainer. You have to do it. Every
oh, of
team
course.
that's flourishing business-wise in the league is
That's why Connecticut almost tried to come here. The WNBA, same thing.
right. But you got to be inside of 128. You got to be on the tee, and this accomplishes both goals. The population center. If you look at the population density, even compared to like Providence or Brockton or Lowell Lawrence, there's no comparison. There's so many more people, and say, oh well, you'll get the Latino. Yeah, you get the Latinos. You get the college kids. You get the just post college pre-professionals and grad students. You'll still get soccer families that the Revs have done so well with over the decades, but just maybe different ones because there'd be more the demos closer to the city center. But I think it's a win. It's a win for the sports, a win for the Revs. It's a win for Everett and the surrounding communities. I'm glad they seem to like. There's still some stuff, environmental remediation and so forth. Yeah, but it's way closer than it's ever been. And the other thing I'll say is that people who were skeptical that the Revs are trying to do it and the Crafts are trying to do it over these years, I don't believe that at all. I'm close enough to it that I can tell you they've been trying in earnest now for nearly 20 years. So it was a great emotional thing to see that announcement a couple of days ago. And again, you don't want to, you don't want to dance before you get to the end zone, right? But
Exactly.
like that, but it's closer.
Gotta
It's
crawl before you
closer.
walk.
Yeah. But I think, how's this? You got to walk before you run. I think we're speed walking right now. And so,
Oh,
yeah, no, that was the biggest leap forward, that announcement the other day,
mhm.
than the Revs have ever taken toward getting a stadium, short of putting a shovel in the ground. So again, I don't want to jinx it, but if the city of Boston was the last obstacle, and if they have a deal with Mayor Wu and Boston, everybody else was on board. Everett, the state, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Crafts. So and again, like, want to be respectful to the fans who have been loyal and been coming to Foxborough all these years, but you just have to go around the league to the other stadiums that are in, population centers, and you see that's where MLS is really thriving the most.
Okay. Well, hey, Brad, I just want to thank you again for sharing your time today with me at Access Premium. I appreciate you spending time with me today.